Hello, I am International Master Danny Kopec, and I'm delighted to have this opportunity to again share my chess thinking and experience with you. This video is a continuation of the concepts and methods presented in my earlier video, Pawn Structures and How to Play Them. In that video, I discussed good pawn structures, bad pawn structures, and pawn structure methods. The material presented in that video is critical for the advancement of any player to the master level and beyond. The only regret I have about the earlier video on pawn structures and how to play them was that we could not cover more opening pawn structures in the 2 hours available. How many times have you succeeded in getting your pieces developed, connecting your rooks, but discovering that your game is lacking in an active plan and in punch? You may be a 1600, 1800, or 2000 player, or even higher, but unless you know the necessary levers in a given structure and take the necessary measures to accomplish them, there is little progress you can expect. That is the purpose of this video. We will continue where we left off with pawn structures. I will present some of the most common and prevalent opening pawn structures and understanding of opening structures, the goals in terms of pawn play for each side, when they occur, and how the pieces should be positioned is essential for the proper play and conduct of the opening of a chess game and its transition to the middle game. Throughout my videos on pawn structures, you will occasionally hear me revert to terminology used by the late, great chess theoretician Dr. Hans Kopec. In his groundbreaking treatise, Pawn Power, in my opinion, the single most important concept from this monumental work is levers. A lever is a pawn move which offers an exchange of pawns and 1, improves your pawn structure, and or 2, damages your opponent's pawn structure. As I described in our first video on pawn structures, there are many kinds of levers, including positional levers, tactical levers, attacking levers, and opening levers. Understanding the necessary levers for liberation or attacking purposes is the single most important notion for successful and strong opening play. Many people would like a formula or prescription for finding correct or good moves in the openings. Opening monographs are very popular because people want to know the right moves in a given opening. In my opinion, the emphasis for the advancing player, particularly young players seeking chess mastery, should be on opening structures, not on moves. That is to say, in chess discussions and literature, one often hears too much discussion of moves. Instead, the focus should be on opening structures and concepts related to them. A move is a short event. A plan is a much longer happening, which relates to the global thinking about what has transpired in a game, what features are present in a position, and what course of action is most appropriate. At the risk of sounding dogmatic, I will state emphatically, the pawn structure of a position dictates what the correct plan should be. This does not mean that finding the correct plan or sequence of moves which comprise a correct plan is easy. There are still many choices and possibilities for how to implement a plan. In addition, we must remember that in chess, even if you are able to find the right plan, there are many different orders in which the moves may be chosen, and this may make the difference between the correct and successful implementation of a plan and its outright failure. Throughout this video, the format for presentation of opening formations will be: 1. The structure will be presented and explained. 2. A typical sequence of opening moves to reach the structure will be presented. And 3, a sample game or game fragment will be presented employing the structure being discussed. We begin with perhaps the most classical of structures, namely the structures which can arise from double king pawn openings. After 1 e4, e5, regardless of which particular specific opening follows, i.e. a Roy Lopez, Philidor defense, or Scotch game, or even the center game, Black has essentially 2 choices. First, to give up the strong point square e5, which results from the Scotch game and center game, or second, to counteract White's efforts to attack his e-pawn by maintaining a strong point on e5, usually the result of playing the Roy Lopez or Philidor defense or similar defenses. The space advantage, which results from White's pawns on e4 and d4 versus Black's pawns on e5 and d6, we call the duo versus the mini-chain. If Black does capture on d4, thereby relinquishing his strong point, then if White cannot capture with a pawn from c3, then White's space advantage is considered relatively insignificant, especially as pieces get traded off. This structure is called the 4-3 spatial advantage. It results from White having a pawn on the 4th rank versus Black's pawn on his 3rd rank. And it means that White has more play on his half-open d-file, a span of 5, against Black's play on his half-open e-file, a span of 4, before he reaches the White pawn on e4. Generally, this is not so important unless White can post a knight on d5, or White can gain full control of the a2, g8 diagonal with a bishop. Black, for his part, gets counterplay on White's relatively weaker e-pawn, but this pawn can easily be protected by the move f3. Here, White may suffer from weaknesses, however, on the dark squares, e5 and f4. Returning to the classical 4-3 advantage, from Black's perspective, his ideal levers are the moves d5 or f5. These levers are usually hard for Black to accomplish soundly, but in either case, when achieved without incurring weaknesses, these levers will usually fully equalize for Black. In double king-pawn openings, where White does play a very early d4, such as in the center game or Scotch game, Black usually must capture on d4 because he does not have the time to establish the strong point e5 square, but gains counterplay with rapid development and pressure on White's e-pawn. Finally, we will explain continuations where White recaptures on d4 with a pawn from c3, whereby Black relinquishes his strong point. In such cases, it is important that Black can quickly and effectively strike at White's central pawn duo with the levers d5 or f5. Examples of each of these double king-pawn concepts will follow. The center game. The center game represents a direct attempt by White to attain an open center with the 4-3 advantage. it is so direct as to seem naive. The moves are 1. E4, E5, 2. D4, E takes D4, Queen takes D4, and now after Knight C6, Queen E3, Knight F6, Knight C3, one would think that there is no way that White should be able to achieve an advantage from this opening due to the loss of tempo with his queen. A book continuation would now be 5. Bishop E7, Bishop D2 to castle long, D5, the critical lever, is already achieved for full equality. E takes D5, Knight takes D5, Knight takes D5, Queen takes D5, Knight E2, Bishop G4, Knight F4, Queen D7, F3, O, exclamation mark. Now White gets mated or loses his queen if he captures the bishop on G4 and accepts Black's sacrifice after Black plays Bishop H4 check if, on the first alternative, G3, Black wins immediately with Rook H E8. On the second alternative, in this position, if King to D1, Black wins quickly after Rook H E8, winning either the White Queen or the White King. Returning to the position after Black on his 11th move has castled, exclamation mark, White just plays castles himself, gets the king out of the line of fire. Black replies with Bishop F5 when Black's game is clearly superior due to his better development. The center game has been somewhat revitalized at the top flight level thanks to the young Russian grandmaster Alexander Morozovich. White's idea is fairly straightforward. Castle queenside and attack with a little pepper added. Morozovich Hebden went E4, E5, D4, E takes D4, Queen takes D4, Knight C6, Queen E3, Knight F6, Knight C3, Bishop B4, Bishop D2, castles short for Black, castles long for White, Rook E8, Queen G3. And here is the pepper. We consider 3 alternatives for Black. The first is Knight takes E4. And here, after Knight takes E4, Rook takes E4, Bishop F4, D6, Bishop D3 is unclear, but with some compensation for White for his pawn. The second alternative is Rook takes E4. And not now, Knight takes E4, Knight takes E4, when, although Black is down the exchange, he's going to quickly win it back through 2 captures on D2 and end up a pawn ahead. Now returning to Black's second alternative, Rook takes E4 on his 8th move, we consider Bishop D3, and then Rook G4 is another interesting line. Instead, the game Morozovich-Hebden continued 8d6 with black declining the pawn on e4, f3, knight e5, h4, and then c6 for black to keep white out of d5, h5, which ended up favoring white. Another game, Shirov against Karpov, Dos Hermanos, 1995, Karpov introduced the novelty in this position, 10 king h8, after which play continued, 11 knight to h3, knight to h5, queen to h2, c6, etc. Another alternative for white on his 12th move would have been queen to e1, but then black would get in his thematic lever through a continuation, 12, bishop takes h3, rook takes h3, f5, exclamation mark with counterplay. Summary: the revived center game is not to be taken too lightly, but with sound, logical play, black can effect sufficient counterplay via the levers d5 or f5. The Scotch game, e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, d4. As in the case of the center game, the Scotch game involves the attempt by white to immediately open and control the center. Again, the correct prescription for black is to develop quickly with pressure against white's e-pawn. E takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6. The most popular main line now continues. Knight takes c6, b takes c6, and here we continue with two possibilities. The first is e5, and the second is knight c3 on white's sixth move. After 6 e5, queen e7, queen e2, knight d5, c4, bishop a6, knight d2. The struggle continues to focus around white's attempt to control more space with his e-pawn, while black tries to eliminate this pawn, or at best prove that it is weak, while he rapidly develops around it. Returning to the position at white's sixth move, if he plays knight c3, then black follows with bishop b4, threatening white's e-pawn, and now on bishop d3, d5, and black has a very free game after he achieves this liberating lever. Another method to try to attain easy equality for black against the Scotch game goes 4, bishop c5, bishop e3, queen f6, an aggressive counterattack, c3, knight ge7, knight c2, bishop takes e3, knight takes e3, castles, bishop e2, d6. Black prepares for d5 or f5. castles. Bishop e6. Knight d2. d5. And again, black has achieved the fully liberating d5 lever. In opening